Have you ever demanded something? What was it that you wanted so badly, and did you end up getting it? Today we will learn about a time when Israel demanded God to give them a king. But before we get to today's lesson, let's look at our new big picture question. Why does sin separate us from God? Because God is holy. Sin has broken our relationship with God. God is holy, which means that he is perfect and has no sin at all. God always does what is right, but we are sinners. God and sin cannot mix, which is bad news for us. But thank God that he had a plan to fix that sin problem. We will learn more about that in just a few minutes. Today we are looking at a time when Israel demanded God to give them a king. But first, let's review where we have been. God chose the Israelites to be his people. He brought them to the land of Canaan and told them it would be their new home. When the Israelites settled in Canaan, they did not follow all of God's instructions, so they had trouble with their neighbors. Whenever the Israelites turned back to God, he sent a judge to lead them, but the time of the judges was drawing to an end. When he was old, Samuel chose his sons to be judges. The leaders of Israel went to Samuel. "You were a good judge," they said, "but your sons have not followed your example. We do not want them to lead us. We want a king like the nations around us." Samuel prayed to God. God said, "Samuel, they are not rejecting you. They are rejecting me as king. Give them what they want." Samuel warned the people that they would regret asking for a king, but the Israelites didn't care. Then Samuel told the leaders of Israel to go back to their cities and wait for a king. One day, a man named Saul came to Samuel. Samuel invited Saul to have dinner with him. Samuel gave Saul the best spot at his dinner table. The next morning, Samuel poured oil on Saul's head. "You will be king," Samuel said. Samuel gave Saul some instructions and sent him home to wait for the right time to start ruling over the Israelites. The Spirit of God was with Saul. Unlike the nations around them, Israel did not have a king. The Bible says God gave them instructions on how to set up their cities, work with each other, and worship him. God was supposed to be the Israelites' perfect king. But the Israelites chose not to worship God and rejected him. They often forgot about God and worshiped false gods. When the Israelites did not obey God, he allowed their neighbors to mistreat them so that they would turn back to God. When they repented, God would send a judge to lead them. And Samuel was Israel's last judge. But Israel continued to turn away from God and eventually demanded Samuel to give them a king like the other nations around them. Even though they had a perfect king in God, they wanted a human king. God warned the Israelites that a human king would not give them what they wanted or make them happy. In fact, he would make their lives a lot worse. But the Israelites did not listen. So God chose a man by the name of Saul to be their king. Saul was not a perfect king, as we will see in the coming weeks. But there was a perfect king who was coming, Jesus. He was the perfect king God would one day send, not just for Israel, but for the entire world. Through Jesus, we all can be forgiven of our sin. God intended for a heavenly king to rule over Israel. But the Israelites did not trust God's plan. They wanted a king like the nations around them. God had a better plan, to eventually send his son Jesus to be the perfect king forever. This week we have a brand new memory verse. It's Isaiah 6:5. It says, "Then I said, woe is me, for I am ruined, because I'm a man of unclean lips and live among a people of unclean lips, and because my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of armies." As we've learned today, God and sin do not mix. Sinful men like Isaiah, and like you and me, cannot live with a holy God. But thank God for sending Jesus to take the penalty for our sin and rise again so that we could be saved. Join us again next week as we continue to look at Saul's time as king of Israel.